Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Sacha Dench. Sacha is a conservationist, adventurer and motivational speaker. Sacha is most well known for her incredible journey of traveling by a paramotor 7,000 kilometers from Arctic Russia all the way through to the UK as she followed the flight of the swans. During this podcast, Sacha is going to be sharing more about her childhood, growing up, and how she first got involved in the sport of freediving and what she's learned from freediving, which she's been able to apply to other adventures. Enjoy. Hi, Sacha.
Hello.
Now, we do actually have an amazing mutual friend, Anna McNuff, who actually introduced us, which is fantastic. How long have you known Anna for?
Not very long, actually. In fact, I just met her a couple of months ago, but she's one of those women that you meet and you just think, I wish that I'd known you for years.
Oh, amazing. I love it. So where are you based at the moment?
Near Stroud in Gloucestershire.
Awesome. Now, people may not have heard of you, Sacha, but how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I suppose I have been titled the Human Swan. That's how a lot of people know me as. In fact, when I went to one of the BBC interviews, they had Human Swan written on the title, so they couldn't find me anywhere when they were looking for Sacha Dench. So I suppose I've come to be the Human Swan, but basically what I do is conservation communication. I was a biologist. I got into telling stories about conservation because it felt like that was the big gap. And for the last 15 years, that's been what I do. It's just in the last couple of years that's gone down kind of a more extreme route and had me flying with swans.
Oh, amazing. I cannot wait to talk about that journey. It sounds absolutely incredible. But I know that you're also like a British national freediving champion, which is super cool. But what I'd be really interested in is just almost going back to your childhood and growing up. Were you into nature and conservation, and adventure and swimming and freediving at a younger age? Or how did that grow and develop?
So I was born in Sydney, if you can't tell that from the accent. I grew up with parents who were really into water, both spearfishing and diving. So from a very young age, I was out when my dad was often surfing. And when he was out surfing, I was playing in the water and then snorkeling. So I spent a lot of time then out and about in the rock pools, getting to understand kind of the surf. And yeah, I had parents who were really outdoorsy. Then later on, my parents split up and my mum moved to the very southeast corner of Australia out into the bush. And there, it was a very different sort of suburban Sydney living. We had a small wooden house that she and her partner then built over time. It was in the middle of nowhere. We had a can toilet, no electricity, no telephone, and it was a 2-hour walk to the nearest possible friend out there. And we didn't have a telephone for me to call and find out whether she was in or not. So if I wanted to go and visit her, it was a long old walk to get there and back again. So in living out there, I definitely learned to entertain myself and to be really comfortable out in the bush, because that was walking through a bit of forest, across a river, up a hill, over some fields. And there are snakes along the way. There's all kinds of things. And I just got quite, I suppose, comfortable with being out in remotish places on my own, and confident in my own abilities to kind of navigate. Sometimes you get lost, the river changes, you can't cross at that point, you've got to go elsewhere, and there's no people anywhere around. So that upbringing, and then my dad had then moved further north onto a big cattle property where we were in the middle of nowhere, and then we had about a 2-mile walk that was just our driveway till we got to the main road. And it was a different kind of landscape out there. But again, I kind of learned how to entertain myself in remote spaces. And in doing that, when someone leaves a kid with freedom and wild spaces, you get interested in nature. It just happens.
Oh my, I mean, were you going to school out there?
Yeah. So at my mum's, I would have to walk to the top of the hill, which was about 25-minute walk up a hill, and then there'd be a bus out there, a really small bus, which would pick up the few kids that lived out along the bush, and then we'd get to the main road. There was eventually a petrol station. They'd drop us off there, and then we'd wait for the school bus to come and get us. And yeah, out of my dad's, it was a similar thing. Both of them, it was about 45 minutes to school.
Wow. I mean, I can just imagine almost like the isolation, and I can see on one hand you must have absolutely loved it having this freedom. But did you get to an age where you thought, actually, I I can't cope with this anymore. I want to go to the city, or I want to change. What happened?
Well, yeah. In fact, within a couple of years from then, my dad started moving to different places for work. So in the end, I was actually doing 3 months with my mum, 3 months with my dad, which is a school term in Australia at the time. So I then just started to move around a lot. So I went to quite a few different schools in the end, and then actually moved to England when I was 15, to Suffolk, and there to live with my grandparents. And they lived in a very large manor house in Suffolk with a swimming pool and a pillar box, I think you call it, at the end of the property, and it was all river fronted and had rose gardens and lawns mown in stripes. Yeah, it was very, very different to the upbringing I'd had in Australia. So that was totally novel to me. It was like stepping into an Enid Blyton book, which I'd read avidly as a kid. So there's a lot of variety and different, I suppose, spaces. But yeah, if I'd stayed out in the bush, I probably would have started to get really itchy feet.
Oh my goodness, it sounds absolutely fascinating. So you came over to the UK when you were 15.
Yeah.
Did you start getting into sports at that age?
Do you know, I was never really into sport, if I'm going to be honest. So I was not much good at anything that involved hand-eye coordination, and I wasn't fast. So organized sort of sports as a kid probably weren't my comfort zone at all. I really liked exploring and doing things. I could swim for a long time, but I couldn't swim fast. So I was never really into sport. It wasn't till, I mean, I did a lot of, I suppose, physical things, cycling and stuff, but not what I would have called sport. I just thought I was bad at that. And then what I did know I was good at is holding my breath in the pool for a really long time. So out with my dad's in this cattle property, we had a swimming pool, and my dad at one point realised I could do a lap underwater no problem, and he started paying me an extra 50 cents it was, sorry, when I could do 2 laps, and then another one when I could do 2 laps on my back or in a completely different stroke. And through swimming like that, and also playing with friends in the pool, playing mermaids, I realized that I could just hold my breath much longer than everybody else. So I realized that was a particular talent that I had, because I certainly didn't have any in terms of speed or anything else.
That's amazing. I love it. I love it playing mermaids as well. How incredible. So how did that transition into free diving? When did you first hear about that as it being an option?
Not until really late. It wasn't until I was, in fact, doing my master's, and I was in the UK for that. And actually, I was out taking photographs in London. This is a bit random, excuse me, but I was on Trafalgar Square, actually, on, I think, St. Martin's in the Fields, the name of the church. I was standing on the steps trying to take a photo of the whole square, and I stepped backwards and I knocked somebody over, and out of their bag spilt all these photographs of freedivers. And I helped him get up again, and his pictures were amazing. And I was like, where is that from? And he said, I've just been on a freediving course. And I was like, freediving? Is that like a proper thing? I knew the movie The Big Blue. I'd watched it many times, but I didn't think it was a proper thing. And he gave me the contact detail for a man in Plymouth who was running courses. And so I called him up and said there was a shipwreck that I'd scuba dived on in the past. And I said, it's sitting in about 26 meters, called the James Egan Lane, if anyone is a diver out there. And it has all these dead man fingers and stuff growing on the outside of it. It's really quite spectacular in good conditions. And so I called him up and said, is it possible to free dive the James Egan Lane? Because I've always thought that would be nice to do. And he said, yes, if you can hold your breath for 2.5 minutes, you should be able to. So I hung up and sat at my desk and at the table there and held my breath for just over 3 minutes. And at that point, I called him up and said, right, can I sign me up? Did the course, held my breath longer than the instructor, and within a few weeks from that, I was competing for Britain.
Oh my God, that's amazing. What is it like going underwater and free diving? Can you try and I'm sorry, do you free dive in Britain?
I learnt here. I used to do a lot more here. It's much I suppose easier and nicer to do overseas. What I really like here is not necessarily deep free diving because the conditions really aren't great, but deep snorkeling or gathering scallops and things. That's a lot of fun, and some of the reefs around Britain are really nice. But I haven't been doing much lately because I've been a bit busy.
Got you. So, can you try and explain for people what free diving is and what it's like being underneath in the water and how it all works?
What is it? So it's basically, I think the dictionary definition is something like anything below 5 meters is considered free diving if you haven't got any scuba kit on you. But free diving competition, what is for me, it's all about testing the limits for yourself in terms of breath hold and in terms of depth. And those are two disciplines that are run separately in a free diving competition. And yeah, they take two quite different skills. So the breath hold thing, I always knew that I was really good at that. Exactly why, I don't know, but I haven't competed for years now. But at my peak, I broke the women's world record in training at 6 minutes and 22 seconds. I held my breath for, but I can pretty much fall asleep for the first 4 minutes then. And that then it's all about learning to understand how your body behaves, because you're completely motionless, how your body behaves as you get lower and lower on oxygen and higher in carbon dioxide as that builds up. And that's a really interesting process over time to learn. And one of the tricks I started to do at the end of a breath hold, when I learned that as oxygen decreases and carbon dioxide goes up, your brain slowly starts to malfunction. This is at the extremes, so don't scare anybody. Starts to kind of, it starts to conserve oxygen by shutting down different parts of your brain. And the first bit that goes is fine motor control. So very, really small, precise movements with your hands. So I'm not going to explain this in a podcast, but I have, Incy Wincy Spider, like moving your fingers between your thumb and your finger. Yeah. So women can generally do this much easier than men. I don't know why, but generally sort of tracking finger and thumb and then twisting them over finger and thumb. You can do this quite fast when you've got lots of oxygen. When that starts to get low, you start to falter. So at the end of a breath hold, I would first be checking that kind of thing. And that's basically looking at when my fine motor control goes. If you go even further than that, you'll find when you come out of a breath hold, your short-term memory goes. So if you ask somebody to instantly show you a couple of fingers and then ask you a minute later or say a word to you, ask you a minute later how many fingers or what the word was, if you can't remember, then you've that part of your brain has shut down. And so for me, I always wanted to be at a point where I'd never went into that area. I just conserved as much oxygen and dealt with all the carbon dioxide as best as I could and for as long as I could. And the reality, I suppose, for that, the techniques are learning how to stay incredibly calm, shut down any kind of form of adrenaline or thoughts that might bring about adrenaline in your body, because that will increase your heart rate and everything. So, yeah, the breath hold is all about conserving oxygen and keeping your CO2 down low. And the depth is all about also handling nerves, because as you go down the water column, there's more and more pressure. Your body normally feels like your lungs eventually get to the point where you are compressed because the air in your lungs is being compressed, and your body feels as though you've exhaled. And if you've never done it before, at that depth, you instantly get the reaction to breathe. Your diaphragm pumps and you get that kind of feeling. And you have actually, when you're free diving, you have actually still got a lot of air, but that's just your body receptors telling you that. And so, yeah, throughout freediving training, it's a long process of slowly going further and further, testing your limits, trying the conditions, doing the same sort of depth in different conditions. And in training, you do the whole thing with safety divers. So a free diver who will meet you at about 20 meters on the way back up again, and they can help you if you have a problem. But for me, the competition, the best thing about that was it's a really controlled environment in the training and the competition itself to test your limits, to try new things. And yeah.
I was going to say, I think a
lot more.
I know. I mean, a couple of things that really sort of that I'd love to learn a little bit more about, which I think would be almost transferable to other women out there who are going on challenges and adventure, are things like dealing with nerves and having fears and remaining calm. Because I think we've all been in those situations where those feelings can come in, and you sort of talked about mind control. I mean, what have you been able to take from controlling your mind in those situations when you are free diving that you've been able to apply to other areas of your life?
Well, I suppose that exactly what you said is one of them. So in freediving, not necessarily in competition, but for example, when you're applying freedive training out, when I'm doing sort of deep water snorkeling, for example, at one occasion I found myself diving down and going through this small rock cave. It was a low rock cave, and it was maybe in about 15, 20 meters, something like that. I swam inside, and there was actually a wobbegong shark, which is not necessarily a dangerous shark, but the only one that can turn around and bite their own tail. And I found myself sort of squished in this cave right above it, and thinking, oh gosh, like, this is the time when I really don't want to upset it. And I couldn't actually reverse because the really long, thin fins, you can't reverse quickly in those. You got to slowly like weave your way out. And I found myself in there already quite deep and going, oh gosh, here I am. And that was a moment where I had to go, I just have to stay calm. And I managed to slowly back out of this particular cave, swiping my feet back and forward, and come back to the top again. And I don't know if that certainly wouldn't have been an easy thing to do had I not already had a lot of experience of testing what I was doing again and again on a line, and even the training in the pool. And so, yeah, definitely mind control. When you're holding your breath in a pool for long periods of time, you have a lot of time to think and be very aware of everything that's happening in your body. So when you're holding your breath for long periods of time in the pool, for example, going for a breath hold of 6 minutes, you just become very aware of your body. So tiny little things like if your shoulders are tighter than normal, or if you're slightly holding your head, if you're slightly stressed, you try and you hold your head up slightly, and that actually takes a lot more oxygen than you would really think. So you really have to focus in all that time on total relaxation. So on, particularly the neck, the shoulders, and your brain. Any thoughts that are stressful, you can feel your heart rate suddenly going up. And it's basically a kind of an intense period of 4, 5, or 6 minutes of controlling what your body is doing, but also making sure that your mind can deal with whatever issues come into it, but can process it without causing a rise in adrenaline and stress and whatever else. And there's many occasions where you actually find that increase in adrenaline can be good, but in others, it can really cloud your thinking. Certainly in a freediving situation, if you're at depth, like with this wobbegong shark. So definitely freediving training has taught a really good awareness of stress. I still wouldn't say I'm a genius at dealing with it in every situation, but I certainly on recent expeditions, people kind of say, "Why? How can you be so blasé about the stuff that you've just done?" I thought, well, I think because I've kind of gone through this process many times in my head before.
I'm just thinking of being 20 meters underground in a cave with a shark. I can feel my adrenaline increasing. I'm just like, keep calm. And I was going to say deep breath, but obviously that's not a good thing to do while you're underwater. Yeah. But let's talk about some of your other expeditions that you've been on. I mean, the main one, which I think most people hopefully will have heard about, is the flight of the swans. And I'd love to know more about that and how it came about.
So I have been working at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, which has a head office at Slimbridge. Some of your listeners might have been there before, and they've been researching a swan called the Berwick swan for about 50 years. It migrates all the way from Arctic Russia and comes to the UK for the winter. Now, in the last 20 years, the researchers have been noticing that the numbers have been declining. And it got to a point a few years ago where we were actually at almost half of what the population had been. We'd done plenty of research in different parts of the flyway. We knew some of the issues that were going wrong for the swan, but it still seemed like there was potentially something missing. There were a load of places along the flyway that are so remote. They start up in Arctic Russia, and the first 1,000 kilometers is tundra where there's hardly any people apart from nomadic reindeer breeders. So there's really remote areas that we really had very little information from. And some of the issues that we knew were a problem, the conservationists in different countries along the flyway, and there are 11 of them, they just couldn't make anybody listen to the fact that the swans were declining. So it just wasn't on anybody's radar as being an issue. So they really needed help to make it more important. And so my role within WWT isn't as a researcher. I work in kind of conservation communications, I suppose, but I also do aerial photography in my paramotor. And I was asked to come and have a look at this problem. I also have a biology background, and I was asked to come in and help the researchers look at, what could we do? How else could we approach this problem? There was an emergency action plan written in 2012, and very little progress was happening in those few years. And I looked at it all. And the thing that was totally absorbing me was their migration route. So I don't know how many times by that time I'd said they migrate from Arctic Russia, but I'd never really had a look at a map and thought how enormous a journey that was for what is the smallest of the white swans. That's a huge journey. And the issues they were talking about, the big things I could see was we need to be speaking to more people, whether they're trying to get out to the nomadic reindeer breeders up in the Arctic and find out what they knew, what might be missing. Trying to just talk to more people, and we needed to raise a lot more awareness along the flyway. And it was all about communication. And one day I was out flying my paramotor, taking some aerial shots actually over Somerset, and I realized that I was flying at about 70 kilometers an hour with my new wing, and that was exactly the speed we'd just recorded the swans crossing the channel. And I thought, I'm flying the same speed as a swan. And then I thought, I'm actually flying at the same altitude, and I'm also exposed to the wind and the weather conditions just as the swans are. And that's where this idea started to form of, could I potentially go and speak to all those people in remote communities and get people all along the flyway excited about trying to help the swans and tell their story for them by flying the route in a paramotor. The other great things about a paramotor is that you take off and land on your feet. So all that first 1,000 kilometers where there are no roads and no runways, I can take off and land on my feet. So any little patch on the tundra, I could probably land and take off on as long as it wasn't wet. So I could go and speak to people in remote communities. And I also am exposed to a lot of the same threats as them. So I could probably really get inside the head of the swan and try and tell their story for them. But if you have a look at a picture of a paramotor, which is basically hanging under a piece of fabric with a big fan on your back, it is quite clear that's not meant for international travel. So I sat on the idea thinking that's a bonkers idea. It will never work. But I sat on it for a couple of months and it was keeping me up at night. So I eventually wrote it up as one page and sent it off to our researchers thinking they would tell me it was a ridiculous idea and that's not how you do conservation. And they didn't. The answer I got was, it's completely bonkers, but it might just be worth a try. And at this moment, we're ready to try pretty much anything. And so that's where the idea came from.
This idea, I can feel the excitement of how that idea first popped into your head. And I can imagine it, getting its own momentum of how that little tiny idea just grew and grew and grew until you wrote it down on a piece of paper. And then suddenly it's like, actually, no, this could be viable. In that instance, when you've got people coming back to you saying, yeah, crazy idea, but it could be worth it. Let's give it a go. Mm-hmm. What was the time frame that you had? Because obviously, I know nothing about birds, but there must be a certain point when the birds start their migration. So you know when you're going to start your adventure or your expedition. How much time did you give yourself to plan and prepare for an expedition like this?
I probably had a year and a half from then till the autumn migration that I actually did. My original thought was that I'd do the spring migration, which is leaving from here and flying north towards Russia. The conditions then are generally nicer. I think it would have been an easier route. However, for various reasons, we figured out that actually I probably had to start in the Arctic. One of those reasons was that in order to get people inspired, certainly across Europe, you really needed to start off with pictures showing how amazingly far the birds go. And if I was flying from the UK, the landscape doesn't change that much between the UK and as you fly across towards Germany, for example. But if you start at the other end, you're starting in the Arctic, and the conditions change really, really fast. The people are very, very different. Nomadic reindeer breeders up in the tundra. So to get people across Europe excited, we probably had to show already where the birds had come from. But I had a lot of other hurdles to go through then. So I probably would have if looking back again, I would have given myself another year, because it was a challenge to put something like that together in a year and a half. Should I go through some of the things that we had to do?
I was just saying, I'd love to hear some more about because I think what can happen is you can have this brilliant idea and it sounds incredible, but when you start thinking about it, you're thinking a 7,000 kilometer migration, it's covering 11 countries, logistically, how are we going to do this? And I think the first feeling that people can get is overwhelm. It's like, how do I even start to plan an adventure or a challenge or this idea I had? So I'd love to hear more about some of the challenges that you faced.
Okay, so one of the first things I had to deal with was the fact that most of the paramotorists that I spoke to all kind of just dismissed it as being a ridiculous idea. Paramotors aren't meant for that kind of journey. But I found at that point, I thought, well, I took everybody's criticism. I tried to ask them, like, why is it? If you break it down into little stretches, each of those is possible. Crossing the tundra with no petrol stations, etc., for refilling and stuff, that was going to be a big challenge, but I kind of parked that slightly. I went to tried to find someone who I thought is the most likely to say yes. So who's kind of at the extreme of, is this possible in terms of aviation? And there was a guy called Richard Meredith Hardy who's done a lot of extreme microlight flying. He was the first to fly from the UK to Australia, and I think the UK to South Africa. And he's head of the Microlight Federation internationally. And so I called him. I sent him an email actually saying, I have this idea that I'd like to do. I know you've done a lot of international expeditions. I'm being told it's impossible, but if you break it down, I think it's doable. Would you be able to offer me any advice? And I didn't know this man. I knew he was, he's done a lot of amazing things. He had no reason to help me really. And the email I got back was just, call me. And I had a half an hour sitting here in a slight panic going, he's about to tell me that I'm being a complete idiot, or this is going to be really productive. So I called him and we had a half an hour conversation. He quizzed me on everything I was thinking of and he laughed a lot, which was great, hung up, and then not long afterwards, he sent me an email giving me contacts in every different country who were going to be able to help with the aviation in their country, which was essential because in reality, I was going to struggle to go through all the aviation rules and everything in every country. But the biggest thing he did was copy all those people in on that email, which included my original email saying exactly what I was going to do. So at that point, I felt like the cat was out of the bag and I was going to have a harder and harder time pulling out of it and saying, actually, it's not possible. Once I had all those people in every country, most of them came back and said, yes, we're happy to advise. We think this is, completely mad, but fascinating. So I think from the very beginning, people were bought in enough to the outcome. So it wasn't necessarily about getting Sacha across from Russia to the UK. It was very clear what the outcome was going to be for the swans, and people bought into that enough to go, yeah, it's a crazy idea. Like, I want to be a part of it. It was a big enough idea that it was exciting. I think that's what I'm trying to say. The next thing I had was how on earth to cross the tundra. And that was probably the biggest. So WWT, who I work for, they gave me $3,000 and sent me off to the Arctic to try and find a way of doing that. So I went up to a place called Narian-Mar, which is very near where all the swans gather before they do the big migration. And I had a room full of people. I gathered from the museum, from the local national park up there, and various other people. when you turn up in a remote community like that, the word tends to get around who you are and what you're doing, certainly if it's something as bizarre as that. So I ended up having to give a bit of a presentation and then having a room full of people to potentially advise. And as I said, pitch to them, this is what I plan to do. There were mostly men in the room. And after they stopped asking me, so who's going to be the actual pilot? I was like, yes, it's me. I showed up put up a Google map that I had found, or it was a Bing map, something like that, of the first 1,000 kilometers. And there were some towns marked along the north. And my first question was, like, am I going to be able to get fuel in these towns? They're quite a long way apart. But I could potentially just do that. And one of them put their hand up and said, well, do you know what the word means in bracket after the name of each of those towns? And I was like, no. And he said, that means abandoned. And I was like, well, how abandoned is that? And some of them were pretty much not existent anymore. And so they obviously had a good laugh at that. And then it just took one man to stand up and start marking. He bought his own map, actually, and he started putting little crosses and other symbols on the map. And as it was being translated for me, he was actually a bush pilot up there and was marking hunting huts and a couple of meteorological stations that we can't see on our maps, but he delivers fuel and food to them on occasions. And if they ever need a rescue, he will also go out and do that. So he was offering to do fuel drops for me to make sure there was fuel, which was great. And at that point I said, why is the fuel going to stay there if hunters and other people are going there? And his answer very logically was, well, if ever they need a rescue, they're going to need, I'm the one who's going to come and pick them up, so they're hardly going to use the fuel. And he was right in the end. So that was a fantastic start. At that point, I knew that I had a way of crossing the tundra with fuel. The other thing was rescue, and he's chairman of the reindeer breeders. So where people said to me, you'll have no idea where the nomads are, we can't give you any idea where they'll be at that point if you need rescue along that way or if you need any help. And he basically said, well, actually, they have some idea of where they are, and he can send a message to somebody in each community before I leave, so that I'll have an approximate idea of where they'll be if I need help. So I also had a plan for backup and help. And when you're flying across country that everybody's worried about bears and wolves in, that's not a bad thing. So, yeah, with that, I had the tundra crossing sort of dealt with. And the next lot of big issues were the flying permissions. And that was pretty huge, particularly for Russia, which was the route I wanted to fly crosses through 5 of Russia's border regions, which they guard quite heavily. They don't easily give permissions for people to even go there. And what I was asking to do was fairly extreme. I wanted to fly in a tiny aircraft that probably wouldn't show up on their radar, with cameras. I couldn't tell them when I was going to fly because I was going to fly when a load of wild birds flew. And yeah, I wanted to do it with a lot of cameras and live broadcast equipment. And most people thought that there's no way in the world they would ever give me permissions for that. But again, that was a case of getting together a whole load of local partners. As within Russia, I ended up with a fixer, an expert in aviation who deals with competitions, who was going to start working on that for us. So yeah, Russia was the biggest deal of all of them. And then all the other countries had different aviation rules, but they were minor by comparison. I ended up with a KLM pilot early on who started helping me with that, even developing new regulations, as there wasn't already an agreed method for paramotorists crossing borders, which seems like a minor thing, but in aviation that's quite a big deal. So I suppose the biggest thing was at the very beginning of as soon as we thought, yes, this is going to be possible, the next thing I did was go, right, there's still a whole load more issues. It's huge. It's going to overwhelm me. But I wrote it down on an Excel spreadsheet of about 100 points I think I had in it. And that was then what I had to start to tackle. And then think about what partners might be able to help with that. What other skills do I need to bring in? And because we had such, I think, an inspiring kind of aim, lots of people volunteered their time.
Yeah. Do you know what I think is really interesting is I think sometimes when people hear about big expeditions, big challenges, it's so easy just to focus almost on the glamorous side, paramotoring along with the swans and traveling through 11 countries and, following the birds, and which, it sounds incredible. But what I'm so glad with what you've explained is the sheer volume of work that goes into planning an expedition like this, and that's a full-time job in itself. But also, I think what I really love is sometimes it only takes one person, like one little bit of encouragement, who knows another person who can connect you to somebody else, and then suddenly it just evolves and it builds it. Like I said before, it builds its own momentum. So take us to this. To the start, to heading up to the Arctic, and yes, I think it was called the Arctic tundra. I mean, what was it like, sort of getting out there and suddenly like, oh my God, I'm going to be following the birds, the swans?
Well, what was it like? It was fairly. I mean, it was September when the first bird actually left. It didn't feel as cold as I thought it would be, because the birds basically only leave the Arctic. They've just been rearing their young, and they basically need to stay as long as possible because there's plenty of berries and food and stuff up there for them. They stay as long as they possibly can to get as fat as possible, so they have the best chance of making it to their next major wetland site. And the next really major one is in a place called Arkhangelsk. And then they pretty much head towards the border with Estonia. So they're quite big journeys. So the birds only leave when the Arctic winter pushes them. So when you get a wind from the north, the Arctic winter can come on really, really quickly. But it was around September 17, 18, something like that. We had just started to get a north wind, a northeasterly, but it still wasn't very cold. And I still had a lot more preparation to do. But one of the collared swans with a GPS collar on is called Daisy Clark, and she headed off on migration. And I was sitting there going, oh no, I could do with another couple of days to get ready still. But she had headed off, and the researchers back at Slimbridge said, you might only get 5 days with a tailwind. In some seasons we've had that. So if the birds are leaving, they know something that you don't, you might as well go, because the Arctic winter can come fast. So with that fear of being stuck in an iced out situation, I packed everything together and left the next day at the crack of dawn. So what was it like? Well, the tundra, for anyone who hasn't been there, is treeless area of lots of pools and mostly kind of lichen covered, very, very low ground. But from above, it looks like a huge marbled, quite brightly coloured area of thousands of pools as far as you can see. So taking off in the morning, there was the kind of call of swans all around, because loads of them had gathered in this the Pechora Delta before they go. So there were lots of swans around. It's actually a beautiful, beautiful morning, but there wasn't any wind. And if you're taking off in a paramotor with all your survival kit, which I needed basically to be able to look after myself for a few days if I landed, I had about 50 kilos on my back. And when you have no wind, it means you have to run to get your wing up into the air behind you and to get enough speed to take off. And that was, to be honest, really, really hard. And my first attempt, I actually got my foot caught around a line and was face planted. But nobody will ever see that footage. I kind of gathered my thoughts again and headed off. And the second one, because there aren't many really long stretches of land because there's pools everywhere. So I just managed to take off right as I ran out of land, which was a good thing, or I'd have ended up in the drink. But once I got into the air, it was just heavenly. An early morning, really pink and blue sort of skies, swans, quite a lot of swans all around. And I basically had to then head from where I was up towards the coast. And in that journey, there's all different sorts of colours of the tundra below me. One bit of advice the pilot had said was that it's really hard to tell what the actual ground is. You can see colours from a few hundred feet up, but it's hard to tell what the texture is. And he said anything that is green, looks like a lawn and perfect for landing on, is actually quite deep water with really fine green plants coming up out of it. So he basically told, and white is a lichen. So he basically said, white, yes, green, no. So basically don't land anywhere that looks like a perfect landing site. So yeah, I was heading off, kind of getting my head around the different sort of landscape. I could see in the distance off to my right, I'd been worried about navigation. If my GPS failed, would I be able to find an Annette's camp? Would I be able to identify different regions? And the reality of finding the Nannettes is that if you're a few hundred feet up, you can actually see quite a long distance. And the little triangles of a teepee stand out like from a really long way away, because there's no straight lines anywhere up in that landscape. There's just nothing but nature. And yeah, from there, you could see in all of the pools, some of them you could see bubbles of gas in them, which is happening, I suppose, more and more now with climate change, that as the permafrost melts, it releases some of the gas. And that was really interesting, because the locals up there talk about climate change like it's an obvious thing. How can you possibly say anything else? Because it's their life. As it gets warmer, the ground is frozen much lower down. Their food is more likely, which they bury underground, goes rotten more quickly. So for them, it's just an obvious thing. So it was interesting to see examples of that myself. And yeah, from there I headed up towards the coast, and that was, again, we've got some amazing pictures up there, because the coast dwarfs you. Some of the beaches were so big. There's a picture taken by a photographer of me and the beach, but the beach is just huge. You can barely see me in it. And as we headed out on that first day, there was actually a pod of belugas migrating, beluga whales, only about 100 meters off the shoreline, and so we could fly along those. It was just, to be honest, absolutely heavenly to be in a really wild place. Belugas on one side, swans and loads of other water birds migrating as well. It was just, yeah, one of the most stunning things I've ever done in my life. And on every hour, I'd say, "Oh my God, I'm never going to see this again." Like, make a mental picture. I'm never going to be here again. So yeah, really, really beautiful.
So just a couple of quick questions. Were you carrying a tent with you to sleep in at night? Yep. Awesome. And then is it quite relaxing when you're flying? Like, are your hands free so that you can like have snacks as you're flying along and use a camera and just sort of go with the motion? Or is it quite sort of full on?
That depends a lot. So a lot of the time I could take my hands off. So your hands are steering, but also maintaining. They're also your way of feeling what the wing is doing. So if the air is fairly smooth, or you have a tailwind, and you're a few hundred feet up, then you can pretty much take your hands off, park them with little magnets, and do stuff that you need to do on your lap. The colder it gets, the less you are able to multitask, basically. The colder it is, the harder it gets to do much other than kind of think and steer and just focus on where you're going. But yeah, if the conditions are nice, you can whip out a camera, snack, get on the radio. There were a couple of occasions where I flew nearish to an oil or gas installation, which obviously had free Wi-Fi on it. So at one point, Twitter just started going ping, 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 ping on my phone. But yeah, some of the time it's relaxing. As soon as it gets the air gets turbulent, then you have to be back on it and flying it.
How did the swans react to you? So you mentioned sort of Daisy Clark. Did they sort of accept you and get used to you? I mean, were you flying, not with them, but just behind them? Like, how did that work?
So I wasn't trying to fly close to any particular birds. They were flying, when they take off, they fly mostly in small family groups, maybe a couple of families together, and a family is a maximum of 7 birds. The adults that haven't bred often fly together in big groups, and then they might be in big V formations flying at altitude. So I didn't try and fly close to any individual families, because that would just have been disturbing them. But big V formations of birds in the sky, they would fly, over me, towards me, under me. Didn't really pay much attention at all. I was just another thing in the sky for them, certainly up in the north, up in the tundra and the taiga. There was one occasion where 2 birds were flying about 100 meters to the right of me, and I was watching them and thinking, wow, this is nice. They're both heading in exactly the same direction. It was a chance to really look at them watch how it's kind of really amazing how birds' heads kind of stay dead straight when their wings are flapping up and down. And I was watching it, thinking, this is really cool. We're both migrating together. And then I noticed we were slowly on a converging path, and they were getting kind of closer and closer and closer. And right before the trip, I had spent a bit of time with someone called Christian Mulek, who flies with captive or with imprinted birds. He's French. I had gone out to talk to him about flying with birds, and he had basically said the birds will not see your paraglider lines. They're okay with the microlight, but he was worried they wouldn't see the lines. And so as these two were getting slowly closer, when they were about 10 meters away, I just thought, oh God, I'm just going to have to move away really quickly. So I put my left hand up to do a sharp 360 away from them, and they just tucked in behind my wingtip. So you know the way that birds ride on the vortices of each other? So these two birds tucked in behind my right wingtip and just flew there for 5 or 10 minutes, riding the wave off the tip of my wing as though I was the lead bird. That was probably one of the biggest experiences of my life. I never in a million years thought that it would be the right kind of airflow for them to ride on, but they didn't seem to mind. And so, yeah, that was a really magical moment of being accepted as a lead bird. After 10 minutes, they took a slightly diverging path and headed off. But in some areas, they really, I could have been a bird.
Oh, I mean, what's fascinating is not only, the challenge for you as an individual, but actually, almost going back to the reason why you were doing this because of the swans and their decline. What did you discover as you were on this journey from Arctic Russia, throughout Europe back to the UK? Did you manage to uncover some reasons why that there has been this massive decline in the swan numbers?
Yes. So just to be clear, I was flying the route and trying to get inside the head of the swan, but the really difference in our two journeys between the swans would basically try and get from wetland to wetland site all along the route. Once they get to their wetland site, they're generally exhausted of energy. They need to feed for a few days, sometimes for a few weeks, before they have enough energy to go on. So the bird's main aim was to eat, then fly as quickly as possible to the next safe spot. For me, my aim was to stop and speak to all the people that I possibly could along the fly, whether that was landing in a Nanette's community or another town or wherever else, and speak to people. And we had an idea that, for example, some hunting is happening in Russia. What we didn't really know is why, and could people be convinced to stop? So that was a key aim all along the flyway, was for me to stop and talk to people. And we found out lots of reasons there, which, things like a lot of people actually can't identify the different swans. And in some areas, people did believe you can shoot some of the swans. There was a lot of confusion about what you can and can't shoot. There was issues up there with the climate change, changing the migration of the geese and the swans. They can shoot geese, and some of the geese numbers are actually really healthy. So the hunting season now aligns more with the time of the swans migrating rather than the geese migrating. The great thing about people up in the north, though, is they're really, really practical. And they asked really practical questions. And the biggest thing they keep saying to me was, even at one place where there were two kind of swan carcasses by the front door, big thing they would say to me is, have you come all the way here to talk to us about swans? And they were so impressed that we would make that kind of effort when some of them had never had any foreigners go there ever, let alone a girl with a paraglider. And the other nice thing about talking to the reason why I think people were so open was that when I land, it's not, as a lot of people might be picturing, I kind of land in like a bit of a superhero, flying superhero. The reality of landing is people normally assume you've fallen from the sky because you've got a paraglider. They'll look up and go like, what have you come out of? Take off my helmet, and my hair's kind of disheveled, and I've been streaming. I often had to fly with my visor up because the air was a bit wet to be able to, it would gather on the outside of the visor. So I've got dried tears and potentially snot down the side of my cheek, fairly blue because it was quite cold a lot of the time, and generally looking a little bit pathetic. And people's first reaction all along the flyaway was, oh my God, are you okay? Do you need help? And they generally bring me inside into the chum or into their hut and have a cup of tea. And once you're there in their house over a cup of tea, I could then have really, really good conversations with people about, isn't it dangerous and why would you put yourself through that? And then we get on to the story of the swans. And the reality is the swans were kind of going through exactly what I was, so I could talk to them about that. But you didn't. You actually you asked what other things we learned along the flyway. So shall I carry on?
Yeah, please do.
Yep. Okay. So in some areas, what I was doing with the tag swans was to try and catch up with them wherever I could along the flyway. And from after the first bit where there was no roads, there was actually a ground crew there with a whole load more people who could follow the birds on the ground, meet up with them in other places as well, and talk to more people. So that was fantastic. And we were setting up, as the trip went on, we were getting more and more media coverage. So some of the towns we'd arrive, and there was actually already a gathering of media people, but also teachers wanting to drag me into a school to talk. So we were getting a really big momentum. Some of the ground crew was stopped at one point by people who'd seen it on the television, and they didn't speak enough English to say much, but they were just flapping their hands and saying Sacha Dench and giving the thumbs up, or gave us kind of free fuel. And in those moments, people then started to send in through social media information, pictures of dead swans. People started to send in footage of swans hitting power lines, so we then had a bit better idea where that was happening along the flyway. Engagement with people started to tell us lots more things as well, which is great. 2 new sites. The swans took us to 2 new sites that we didn't know were important on their migration route. So that was exciting. And they were found because I was trying to track particular birds. One of them is in Arkangelsk. There's a big bay there. And one of our swans just suddenly took a detour and went north again. And it was like, there must be a reason for this. I managed to go out and fly over it. And in doing that, trying to find this particular point on the map, counted about 2,000 swans out there and could see that they were all eating this potamogeat and the water plant that they like. So in doing that, discovered that was actually an important site. So we're trying to work with the university up there now to start doing a bit more research. What other issues? Identification of swans was definitely a major one. There were various, but particularly from the air, the thing that is so blatantly obvious as you fly from Russia, where the wetlands are fairly untouched, and it's the reason why we have healthy waterbird populations in a lot of areas, because they breed up there. As you move across Europe, there are less and less wetlands and more development encroaching on them. Human beings like to build things around wet areas, and they're the areas that the swans need to use en route and in all their life. So you can really see that the wetlands, there are less and less wetlands all along the route. And the reality in Britain is that I think we've lost 90% of our wetlands here in the last 400 years, which is a reasonable chunk of time, but that is a lot of land to go. That's probably in the UK the biggest thing that we need to tackle, and hopefully that will be part of my next expedition.
How long were you out on the expedition for?
3 months in the end. I hoped it would be 10 weeks, but with a knee injury and various other things, really bad weather in Estonia, I was stuck there for about a week. It took me about 3 months.
I mean, absolutely incredible. What was it like? Because I believe you were the first person to fly on a paramotor over the English Channel. Is that correct?
First woman. So first woman to cross. Yes, a man had actually done it. In fact, it was Richard Meredith Hardy who helped me, who was the first man I consulted with, who sent the email to all those partners along the flyway. So, I was the first woman to do it. They made a really big thing of it, which was, it was great. It was coverage, and it was the same day that a load of the swans had done the crossing. Someone else, a man had done it in 1980 something.
Drat, but you were the first one, which was amazing. But that
I tell you what was a bit weird was landing near to Dover and having a load of media there kind of saying, wow, how does it feel? Welcome home, and it's great to be done, and how does it feel to be the first woman to cross the channel? And the reality was I'd just done over 6,000 kilometers of flying, and the channel crossing is 30 kilometers, I think, 30 something. And I really wanted to say, it's kind of, it was all right. It was 30 kilometers. There's a lot of extra things you've got to bear in mind when you're crossing the water. But it did seem, when you've done 6,000 kilometers, that 30 kilometers, sorry, seems a bit insignificant. But people are interested in that in particular, aren't they?
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, it must have been a stunning moment seeing like the white cliffs of Dover, the birds and the waves. If you did it at like sunset, that would just be. Did you do it at sunset?
No, no, I did it. I did it reasonably early in the morning. In fact, we were waiting for one of the last French permissions until about 9:30. So it wasn't particularly early. It was a really, really lovely day. But yeah, when I first saw the cliffs of Dover, I had thought, because the journey had been going so well by that time, so many people were interested. Had actually been thinking, I don't want to go home. Like, this is really, really good. I feel like I'm in my element. Like, it's a weird combination of skills I have, understanding of the science, getting inside the head of the birds, talking to people. This is just where I feel at home. And I thought, I really don't want this to end. And then I saw the White Cliffs of Dover, and I just burst into tears. I just fell out of my eyes, and I thought, gosh, what is that? I must be ready to go home. So yeah, it was a pretty big moment, really.
Oh, an incredible trip and an amazing trip. And I'm so pleased it did catch the imagination, of the public and social media, so that you could actually raise this awareness. Now, you did say then that have you got another expedition planned?
I have a few in the planning, to be honest, because I think there's been an ongoing, over decades, problem with trying to highlight conservation issues for migratory species. And we kind of showed people a way that it really could work. So there's a few other flyways and a few other particular species that could really do with the same kind of treatment. And I kind of feel like I was made for doing that now. So they're in the planning. But yes, in the UK, I'm planning to fly around the UK and potentially Ireland as well, to specifically look at where have our wetlands gone and where can we put them back. So it's basically, in each region, it's going to be a kind of a different story. It's not a huge epic migration from Russia, but in reality, if you were to trace the whole coast of Britain and Ireland, it's about the same kind of distance. So it'll be a big journey, but one that's very much based around looking at the landscape from the air and thinking, what has changed. There's a lot of stuff you can tell just from town names and historical data to show that the wetlands have gone, but so have a lot of our wildlife. And having done this journey, I've seen the kind of power of, once you empower individual people and can show that every little effort is a small one, but combined they can make a really big effort. And people of all kinds, hunters, power companies, farmers, all kinds, got on board with Flight of the Swans to say, yeah, we'll do our bit. I'm kind of hoping we'll generate the same kind of enthusiasm all around Britain, because a lot of individuals doing a small thing could make a huge impact.
Absolutely. When are you planning on starting?
Spring next year.
Spring in 2019.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Do you know what I love so much is the combination. Like, it seems so random, but if you think, your background in biology, being a conservationist, working within the media, having this experience in paragliding and paramotoring, and it's all come together so beautifully to to do this incredible Flight of the Swans. And sometimes you just feel as though, well, I just feel as though like the universe has all come together to make it happen.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's definitely, I think when you get to a point where there's huge challenges, but every time you come up with a block, somebody from around the network finds a way of finding a way through. We had no luck, for example, for permissions in Russia. And then a man who's actually had sponsored a tent for us happened to say, do you know that my brother happens to work at the embassy in Russia? And could that be of any help to you? And it was like, yes, that sort of thing just kept happening again and again and again. And in the end, I kind of felt a bit like imagine a stage diver would be. I'm kind of scared of crowds of people, so I probably would never be in that situation. But where you just feel like, you can jump because enough people there are kind of in the moment and will catch you, or will, help get you out of whatever situation you end up in. So, yeah, definitely got to a point where it felt like I'm meant to do this. There's enough people supporting it that it's gonna work.
Absolutely. Now, Sacha, where can people find out more information about you and the Flight of the Swans?
They can, Flight of the Swans is their website, and Facebook probably has a lot more content on it now because that got more active. I am writing a book. There's also a film in production, so hopefully that will be out. For me, social media, sachadench.com is the website.
Fabulous. Do you know when your book's going to be coming out? Is that the dreaded question?
Well, yeah. Yes, I hope there's a lot of adventurers out there who are trying to put it together, but this is quite a kind of complex story. I'm really trying to simplify it. Spring next year is when it's supposed to be ready, so it's a while off.
Fabulous. Well, best of luck with the book and the film and the next challenge in spring 2019. And thank you so much for sharing more about your incredible journey, being the human swan and taking us with you and sharing more about your life. Absolutely inspiring.
Thank you very much. I've long wanted to be on this podcast to talk to you. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Hey tribe, how you doing? I hope you guys are well. Don't want to take up much more of your time. Just wanted to give you a few quick updates and a few little requests from me. The Tough Girl podcast is up for an incredible award, the Be a Game Changer Awards, which is hosted by the Women's Sports Trust. So it's up for the Media Initiative of the Year, which is absolutely incredible. I'm up against some big competitions, Sky Sports, the BBC, Manchester City. And now it all comes down to the public vote. And this is where I really need your help. I really need you to take 3 little actions. I need you to click on Google and go to Women's Sports Trust Awards, click on the Vote Now button, go through and vote for the Tough Girl podcast, because every single vote really, really does count and it makes such a huge difference. So I'd be incredibly grateful if you could. I'm obviously very, very passionate about what I do. It's all about increasing the amount of female role models in the media. It's about motivating and inspiring you. And it's about getting these stories out there. We've had over 150 episodes now, these incredible stories, these adventures, these challenges, these women who are sharing their journeys and providing, advice and tips and inspiration for each of us to go after our own personal challenges. And I obviously want to get the word out there as much as possible. And it's through your voices. You have got so much power through the use of social media, through telling your friends, through email. So I really, really would appreciate it if you could take a moment to vote for the Tough Girl podcast. That would be incredible. We've had some great retweets. So Gabby Logan retweeted as well as Cheryl Strayed on Twitter, which was fantastic to see. There's also been some lovely tweets as well. So D.M. at pause on the keyboard on Twitter said, Sarah has single-handedly built up the Tough Girl podcast show and is now up against Sky, Channel 4 and Man City for a Women's Sports Trust Award. Just wow. I love listening to the podcast and it has brought me much inspiration and motivation. I urge everyone to vote and support her, which is just amazing to read. Thank you so much. She Extreme has also been incredible as well. Stoked at Tough Girl has been nominated for a Women's Sports Trust Be a Game Changer Media Initiative Award. Sarah has showcased brilliant women adventure role models on her podcast. So great to see Sarah getting the recognition she deserves. Vote for Sarah. Oh, it's just incredible. Ali Mahoney as well, a patron of the Tough Girl podcast, as well as being a guest on the Tough Girl podcast. She's has her own incredible company called I Think Sports. And she wrote, we all know that women are still hugely underrepresented in the sports adventure media. So all the more reason to vote for someone who is being proactive and addressing it with a fantastic podcast. Please vote. So absolutely incredible to see the support out there. Thank you so much for everybody who has voted, who had let me know that they've voted. I appreciate it so much because, less than a minute of your time can make a massive difference in getting the stories out there. What else has been happening? Just give you a quick more updates. I did my first Facebook Live for the tribe, which was super fun. So I did that with my sister, Caroline Wellingham. And we've got another one coming out on the 8th of May. We're going to Facebook Live with Stacey Copeland. So that's going to be awesome. We're going to be learning more about how she turned professional. She's one of the only 6 female professional boxers in the UK. She's also going to be talking more about her Paid the Way initiative, which is all about increasing the amount of female role models in sports. So that's going to be super fun. That is for patrons only. There's going to be another Facebook Live happening on the 14th of May with myself and Adley Goody from The Wild Show. We've got a special announcement that we're going to be making, which is super awesome. I've also spent the past couple of days brainstorming ideas of how I can really add more value to the tribe, to the closed Facebook Facebook group to make sure that I'm doing everything I possibly can to give value to you guys, to help support you as you go after your adventures and challenges. I've got some great ideas. Now, if you're thinking, what is the tribe? The tribe is the closed Facebook group. It's a closed Facebook group. It's an exclusive Facebook group. It is for the patrons of the Tough Girl podcast, the female patrons of the Tough Girl podcast who are donating $5 a month and more to be a patron. And you can do that through Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. Sign up there and then you'll get access to this exclusive content which comes out and is only available in the Facebook group and on the Patreon page as well. We're now up to 192 patrons supporting Tough Girl podcast, which is amazing. I mean, April has been an incredible month. I'm really hoping that May is going to be an incredible month as well for new patrons. The goal for May is to reach 200, so I need 8 more patrons to sign up before the end of the month. That is the goal. So if you listen every single week, you're a regular listener, you get a value from it, you've applied something to your life and you think, actually, this has made a difference to my life. I am getting value from it. I'd really appreciate if you could give that value back to me to help me grow and support the podcast, to invest more money into it, and also for me to actually earn a wage from it. I will be moving out of home at the end of August. At the moment, who knows where, who knows doing what, but I actually need to be able to earn an income for that to happen, but we're going to make it happen some way and somehow. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate all of your support. Please do vote. Be a Game Changer Awards, the Women's Sports Trust, the Media Initiative of the Year. Vote for the Tough Girl podcast. Voting ends 13th of May. It is so important that you vote. Thank you so much. I will be back with you next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl podcast. Have an incredible week wherever you are, whatever you are doing. Just get out there, have some fun, enjoy life, and just give it your all.